Well, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be able to come to you here in Santa Barbara quite unexpectedly. I find that very shortly I will be leaving California. We've been here almost all week, and we will be leaving tomorrow and heading on back to headquarters in Colorado Springs. Then, of course, I plan on going to the East Coast, and then we'll be coming back and getting ready for the Easter Conference, which will be held in Colorado Springs this year. And I specifically want to invite you all who are able to attend that conference. I can promise you that this year there will be a large number of surprises that some of you may have anticipated and some of you may not have anticipated. It promises to be a very great conference, one that I hope you will not miss. I know that if you knew all that was to take place, none of you would miss it. That is, I'm quite sure most of you would make every effort to get there. But on the other hand, I can't make premature announcements because I'm sort of caught in the jar of mystery where I have certain things that are restricted at this time, and we are not announcing because we're getting ready to announce it, and I can't blow the whistle on ourselves. I feel quite honored this time to be able to come here and see what my wife Elizabeth was able to accomplish in the line of improving the decor in the hallway, and I think it has added greatly to the utilitarian as well as beauty aspect of the chapel. And I think that to see as many of you turn out for an unexpected occasion as have done so today makes me feel a very warm feeling in my heart toward the people of California. And quite naturally this is so because we had this in our heart when we first placed this center here as a place where young people, together with people of all ages, could come together and not only worship but make contact with the higher level of thought that is represented by those who have gone on before us as a pillar of cloud or a pillar of fire by night. I'm speaking now of the ascended masters, those who have followed in the footsteps of the eternal Christ, recurring in every age and enabling people in every age to make those contacts with God which are so important and essential to our souls. I think the figure of God is often, in many of us, anthropomorphic. That is to say, we have a God made in our image. And it is sometimes difficult for us to envision the living God in the great spiritual tides of reality that is involved with the Godhead. However, one of the essential parts of the Godhead is captured in Jesus' famous statement where he said, I go unto my Father, I go unto your God, and I go unto my God. And he pointed out in this the absorption into the Godhead of the being and consciousness of the Christ. That from henceforth the very being of God himself, the Godhead, would be richer because it would have absorbed all the magnificent qualities that were externalized in the life of Jesus. The divine intent has not been to create beings that are solely subservient and dependent upon others, but rather rise to their God estate. And in rising to their own native God estate, are able to contribute something of worth from their own being to the Godhead, thus enriching the universe by each who returns unto God. And of course, through the law of rebirth, being able to be reborn toward that more perfect day that one day will dawn when all mankind will at last express the perfection of God in their life. And this is the Christ's perfection that the chief cornerstone of the temple has already placed firmly upon its foundation. And therefore the temple of the universal as well as the temple of the individual can rise an edifice of reality here upon the plains of the world's thought. And we find that man can become one with God, as Christ also did. Now, in the midst of all this sublime oratory that we're entering into, I would like to tell you a little story. I hope that it will amuse some of you a little bit, as it amused me recently when I first heard it. It seems that it was the occasion of a man's and his wife's wedding anniversary. And so he decided that he would go somewhere downtown and buy her something that he thought would please his wife. And so as he was going by a pet store, he decided upon a parrot. And so he took the parrot and brought the parrot home, and it had 2 strings, one on each leg on the perch. And so he told his wife, now he says, you pull the left-hand string. And so she pulled the left-hand string, and the parrot said, "Happy anniversary, darling." And so he was quite delighted with this, and he said to her, now pull the other string. So she pulled the right string. The parrot said, "Good morning, it's a nice day." So about that time the wife turned to him and she said, "Why don't you pull both strings?" And the parrot looked up at both of them and turned to the man and said, "If you pull both strings, I'll fall off my perch, you idiot." So today, I suspect that many people would like to pull both my strings, so I fall off my perch right now, you see. Telling a story like that after such a sublime statement that preceded it. But nevertheless, I think sometimes that we need to have a sense of relaxation because the world is far too tense. We find a great deal of tension as a result of man's concerns. And we find that these concerns have certain validity. We are concerned about the raising of taxes. We're concerned about the high cost of living. We're concerned about the high cost of housing. We're concerned about what our president is going to do next. We're concerned about, will the communists take over this country? We're concerned about, will our souls be saved? In other words, what's going to happen to us individually? We have all manners of concerns that come to us, and these concerns in return create tensions in our being that do not give us a feeling of happiness that we ought to have in this beautiful universe. Because in reality, if you will stop and think of it, the replica, the divine replica, or the image of God in which man was made, was a perfectly beautiful and magnificent body temple, a magnificent soul consciousness, a magnificent spirit. In other words, man was created God-like and endowed with God-like powers. Something intervened, something occurred in the use of the office that man had received originally. And so we find that history has already proclaimed to us that there is a great deal of suffering in the world. And if you go back in history, you will find that in past ages the suffering was even more acute in some ways than it is today, because we are able today to find the answers to many of our material questions. We punch a button or push a dial or do something with our telephones, and lo and behold, we are connected with another party in another part of the world, and we hold a conversation. We're able to get on a fast jet airplane, and in 2 or 3 to 4 hours we're able to be almost anywhere in America. We are able to put a man on the moon in a matter of a few days, and that man is able to communicate across interstellar space with this world. We are able to put new arteries in hearts that are damaged. And many people who were hopeless 100 years ago, today they have hope. They can go to the hospital and have surgery, or they can have medical treatment, or different things can be done, and these people's lives can be saved. We do brain operations. We do all kinds of things that were never heard of in the past. And so the quality of life upon the earth is today a better quality in a material sense than it has ever been before in history. And yet all manners of conflict still are raging in many of the underprivileged areas of the world, and many people are still suffering in the world. We have existing side by side great wealth and great poverty in the world. And we have great wealth of a spiritual nature existing also in some individuals. And yet we have greatly impoverished people in a spiritual sense existing in all churches and outside of churches and all over the world too. People that are asking all kinds of questions and are not satisfied with the answers that they are getting. Isn't it a strange paradox then, that at a time when we have advanced to such a high level of attainment, that at the same time we have such a dearth of spiritual reality in the world? Should it be this way? We don't think so. And so we know why these conditions have occurred. Now, some time ago, Mrs. Prophet and I began the actual writing of the book, Climb the Highest Mountain, which some of you have, of course, read, and probably some of you have not. In that book, we set forth the synthetic image. We tried to explain that mankind is really a giant computer of very great ability, and that the subconscious being of man is able to receive sight and sound impressions, which sight and sound impressions constitute upon the inner tape, if you will, or the inner memory disk, if you will, or call it what you want to, the inner placid or ordinary blackboard of consciousness, a surface upon which may be inscribed these sight and sound impressions, thus creating a synthetic individual, because the individual that God had made, that has been endowed with the power of diastole and systole, the power of the heartbeat and the perfect control of the automatic functions of being, that person is, of course, different than the synthetic individual, the individual that is compounded of impressions. In other words, what are our first impressions? We often laughingly say that some of the earliest impressions are perhaps when we see a big spoon that looks like a steam shovel coming to us with a whole load of oatmeal and sugar and God only knows what upon that spoon. And as a babe, we have no choice except to accept it. And if we try not to accept it, it probably lands on our face or it runs down our chin or all over our bib. So you see, our early impressions that occur to us, these impressions are almost ludicrous in some ways. And then as we grow up and are able to sort out these impressions and develop our own personalities and begin to understand what the world is all about after our own fashion, then you see we change, but we do not necessarily develop a spiritual consciousness at all. Because these impressions do not cause us to develop spirituality. We develop a limited ability to cope. We have the ability of response. We find that we can either become feisty or we can become so passive that we just sit there and more or less accept whatever is fostered upon us. And you know this really happens, and there are people today in the world who are truly cast for milquetoast. They just sit back, and whatever happens, if the government decides to do a certain thing, they accept it. They say, we're going to raise the price of stamps now to 12 cents a stamp. People say, well, stamps have gone up. Do you know that? Sure. They accept it. Then you have others who are not placid at all. These people, they get up on a soapbox, and they say, we've got to do something, you know, the old Boston Tea Party did. We've got to do something about it and improve the world. Now, if everybody in the world was like Casper Milquetoast, and the politicians were like they are today, what would happen to our world? What do you think would happen to it? It'd be an awful situation, wouldn't it? On the other hand, if we went all into complete radicalism and we all began to find fault with everything and never could appreciate the value of anything, we were not well balanced to be able to determine how to act, you see, It wouldn't be good that way either. So we have to recognize extremism as undesirable, and yet we cannot be the kind of people that just sit back and do nothing about our life. And I don't care if you're a Casper milk toast or if you're the other type. If you're the other type, you probably better temper the wind a little bit to the shorn lamb of people, because we cannot always have everything handled by radicalism. But at the same time, we've got to handle things by determinate and consistent efforts. And when you're going to do this in an outer way, concerning your little material life, which comes to an end in 70 in most cases, then certainly you ought to be concerned about your spiritual life that comes from the long, distant iceberg of the past into the moment where you see the tip of the iceberg, and you know there's a lot more to it, and you know that eternity is going to face you, and you know that eternity is not necessarily a hostile environment, but it is an environment of hope and promise. Now listen to this. Hope and promise. But not hope and promise where we do nothing about it. It is not automated as our heartbeat. The heartbeat of the future is not automated. If we do nothing about it spiritually, if we do not accept our birthright, if we do not accept the great tides of spiritual reality that are already running in our lives, and do not open up the floodgates of reality within ourselves by application to the ascended master consciousness, to the Christ consciousness, if we do not make some effort or some attempt, we will become stultified, we will become root-bound, we will stand right where we are, and we will make no forward progress whatsoever. In fact, we may find ourselves even going a little bit backward, simply because we have not recognized our solemn responsibility to do something, to bring ourselves into attunement. You cannot listen to a television program anywhere in the world without turning the dial. Of course, if you leave the set on, fine, already pre-tuned. But then you have to punch the button to turn it on again when you're ready to listen to a program. And so you must make the effort of turning the dial, of tuning in to the station, and the magnificent station of ascended master consciousness must be tuned into. It will not manifest automatically like our heartbeat and those elements of control in our lives that are automated. I want you to all stop for a moment and understand what I'm talking about. In other words, you can just simply lay there in an unconscious state, asleep. You can take a sleeping pill that will make you sleep for, we'll say, 3 or 4 days. And your body would keep right on functioning, wouldn't it? You wouldn't die. You could sleep for 3 or 4 days. Presumably, the vital functions would probably carry on. At least we can so surmise. But on the other hand, spiritually speaking, just because we are a vegetable, just because we eat, just because we sleep, just because we function, because we have concourse with our neighbors, just because we do something, does not mean that anything is going to happen to us spiritually. It will not happen automatically. It will only happen because we desire it to and because we do something about it. Well, people may say, but God wants it to happen. Yes, He does. He wants the most wonderful things in the world to happen to you and to happen to me. He wants us to have the Christ experience. He wants us to pass through what is called the cycle of regeneration. Not just generation, not just being born physically, not just growing up and going to a material school and learning the 3 R's. He wants us instead to begin the process of communication between the divine level of consciousness. And the divine level of consciousness is not an ordinary situation. We hear about phenomenal things like someone receives a letter in the mail and they touch the letter, and before they even know who it's from because the address on the outside does not show. Now all we see is U.S. Postal Service. They've taken away most of our postmarks today, and so we can't really see what's inside, and so we touch the letter and we immediately know who it's from. It's a typewritten letter, but still we know who it's from. And this is something that gives us a precognition. A telephone rings, and when the telephone rings, we say to ourselves, oh, that's Aunt Minnie. And we know it turns out, yes, it's Aunt Minnie. So we were right. And sometimes it's someone we haven't heard from for months or years, and we'll still get it. That is who it is. And so it will be. And we think that phenomenal manifestations indicate that we have achieved something of spiritual growth. All we have experienced is a psychic manifestation that denotes that we are starting to tune in with these powers of precognition which exist in the universe, and they exist for everyone's use. This does not necessarily guarantee to us a quality of spiritual growth, but it is often confused between spirituality and what we may call psychic qualities, or being psychic, astrologically, and all kinds of different ways. Now, I'm not running down psychic phenomena. I'm merely saying that to possess psychic qualities does not guarantee that we possess spiritual qualities. And when I speak of spiritual qualities, I will take you back to that great theologian who was taught at the feet of Gamaliel, Paul the Apostle. And what did Paul have to say about spirituality? He said, and I will use a very short quote, until Christ be formed in you. Denoting then that the emanation of the Godhead through the Christ consciousness of Jesus the Christ, and through the Christ that was even before, from the foundation of the world, before Abraham was, I am. That Christ consciousness, he wanted to be formed in us, which consciousness had a sense of unity with the Father. That is the important thing. Unity with the Father, with all that unity with the Father implies. We have a minute spiritual creativity within ourselves. It is dynamic and flowing. And when we start the release of the magnetism of God in our lives, there are transcendent changes that occur in our lives that can be transmitted physically as well as spiritually unto human beings, and will be a catalyst in their lives that will change their lives magnetically and spiritually to respond to the vibratory actions of the Holy Spirit. And this is something different, until Christ be formed in you. We see in the drama of the woman at Jacob's well, and we have drunk from that well, we see in that drama that Jesus sat there to the woman. He looked at her and he said, "Thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou now hast is not thy husband." And she said, "Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet." You see, there is a tendency for everyone to equate the quality of prophecy with precognition, or the ability to be able to read what is in the human aura of an individual, for example, that magnetic emanation that comes out and up the spinal column to the medulla oblongata and emanates through the atmosphere just around the head. We look at this, and some of us are able to read the very lives of those upon whom we gaze. But this in itself does not denote that we would possess spiritual qualities, because spiritual qualities are not to be equated with soothsaying, fortune-telling, or even reading the human aura, which is perfectly all right, understand, and valid, but it does not guarantee spirituality, that being guaranteed by the statement, until Christ be formed in you. When Christ is formed in our life, what does take place in our life? We cannot just get into the outer manifestation of the character of Jesus Christ, But we have to be able to get into those inner qualities of his life which he exhibited when he stood upon the mount of temptation and said, "Get thee behind me, it is written, thou shalt worship God, and him only shalt thou serve." We must be able then to make a distinction between the things of the world and the things of God. Well, you may say, but God owns everything. God made everything. Quite true. But his real estate seems to have passed into other hands. And the title to it is now in temporal hands. And so it is. People are always conveying, either upon death or because they wish to give property or they wish to sell property. And so the real estate of this world is always being conveyed from someone to someone. But in reality it came from God. But it has become the things of the world. Objects, they become the attachments, the objects of our possession. In other words, what we possess. This is not our life, Jesus said, and a man's life does not consist of the abundance of the things which he possesseth. But somehow or other we have a tendency as human beings to have and form certain attachments to those things that we possess, whether it's clothing, automobile, houses, lands, or field, or whatever. We say, this is mine, this is mine. And so, after a while, we come to feel that what we have is the all-important factor of our life, when in reality it doesn't mean a thing, because that life is more than meat and drink. The very quality of life. Sometimes if you stand before a physician and he says to you, you have a month to live, you're going to say to yourself, that life is the most precious thing that I own, is the ability to live. But now you'll be talking about your physical life. You'll say to yourself, well, physically, I'll be able to live for 1 month. But what guarantee do we really have of our physical life? None whatsoever, except the mercy and grace of God. The dictates of our karma, whatever we send out into the world, that determines how long we are supposed to live. Each of us is given an allotment. The very hairs of our head are numbered. But then I have seen example after example after example where individuals that were intended to die December 13th, 1962, for example, are still with us. And you say, well, how is that? Yes, their karma said in the Akashic record, clearly stated they would die December 13th, 1962, but they're still here. Well, the mercy of God endureth forever. And something in their life changed. They didn't bargain with God, but heaven took note that certain improvements were being instituted in their life. The karmic board noted it. And so they were given life extensions. I've seen this done for many, many people. But after all, is this physical life extension a meaningful thing? Yes, it is. It's meaningful to them at the time because it gives them an extension of what is the purpose of life in the first place. The purpose of life in the first place on the physical plane is so that the elements of perfection from the higher planes may be brought into our life and builded upon the chief cornerstone of the temple, which is Christ, the consciousness of the universal God, the sense of oneness that identifies us with God, the link between selfhood and divinity. And selfhood and divinity are an ongoing process. Now, I realize that many people have an idea in this world of an old man, God is an old man, Lincoln, sitting in an antiseptic corner of the universe sprayed with chlorophyll. And there he sits, almost resembling Father Time or Father Christmas, and they think, yes, this is God. And yet, we learn very clearly that God is the Spirit, and they that worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. And so we see that man's concepts of God are very warped. They're very warped because people have different ideas. It doesn't work the way so many people think. God in reality is really all of us and a great deal more than all of us. We have a universe here that is so large that I don't know of anyone, including Mr. Einstein when he was alive, that ever could fathom the great size of the objective physical universe. And they tell me that the physical universe hangs beneath the etheric universe, something as a little bread basket hangs below a dirigible or a blimp, if you know what I mean. In other words, you have a great blimp of an etheric universe, and down below it you have a physical universe. And all of this itself is actually created within a cosmic egg. And that's much larger still. It's like it's part of the yolk of an egg. And so we have this universe, and we know that with all the seismic rounds and all the stretching out of time and space, and time, of course, is called Kal, and space is Desh according to the Hindu philosophy. The Desh of space and the Kal are the calculations of time. We have these measurements, the bounds of our habitation, and these seem to be appointed unto us according to a certain length or order. And this is order in our universe. And yet, in contradistinction to all of this order that exists in our universe, we have, according to the Greek mythology, which is logical and reasonable, and I believe to be divine in this case, is we have this tremendous dragon, Tiamat, the symbol of chaos, and we have the chaos that seeks to devour the Kal of time, and vice versa. In other words, what they're trying to do with you and me is, and if you don't believe it, you listen to some of your television commercials, they're trying to waste our time. That's the whole thing. They know very well that you've got so many years to live. Everyone has so many years to live. And so they manage it very, very successfully to fix it so that most of us don't have any time. Yet we have just as much time as everybody else does. But they make us feel that we don't have any time. They sit there and the commercial is cute. So we listen to the commercial. And then the program is entertaining. So we become entertained, and we've whiled away another hour. And then we say, well, now I'll procrastinate. I will not read this spiritual exercise. I'm not going to do my decrees tonight because I'm into this program. Or I've got a neighbor, or Aunt Minnie's dropping in, or something is happening, or I don't feel too well, I think I'll lay down and rest. And so most people find, and we know this to be true, they find that their time is devoured in little pieces. The old Tiamat is just chewing up Kal the time, and the first thing you know, Kal is gone. There isn't any more time. There they stand face to face with eternity. Well, they say that won't matter too much because in eternity 1,000 years is as one day, and one day is as 1,000 years. And so they look at eternity and they say, well, that doesn't mean too much because when I'm dead I won't know too much about time. Well, physically speaking, no, this is true. But you see, there is a statement in Revelation that I want to quote to you. What does it say? It says, he that is holy, let him be holy still. And he that is filthy, let him be filthy still. And what does it mean? What it really means is that you're not going to get any better than you were on the day of your death. If you think you're going to go into the other side of life, and on that side suddenly improve, become perfected, you are wrong, because the whole raison d'etre, the whole reason for having a physical incarnation is so we can be perfected in this incarnation to draw down the great perfection of God from higher realms and bring it down into our dimensions. So whatever we attain of holiness, of wholeness, whatever we attain in life, that is where we are. And there isn't any more. That's your rating on the divine stock market. That's exactly where you are in the divine stock market. It's in the paper. You can read it there. It says stock, 78.5. And that's exactly what it is, you see. Your stock is at a certain rate on the market, on the divine market. That's your stock. It isn't anybody else's, and it can't be anybody else's. So you write your own ticket. It's you individually who determine whether or not you're going to attain mastery. And what do the people do, the people that fall off the perch because somebody pulls both strings? You know what happens when they pull with both strings? And what happens is this, that they go overseas looking for a guru. They go looking for a spiritual teacher. They're looking for some great man that's going to tell them all the wonderful things that's going to happen to them. The guru. Oh yes. The guru will look at them. He'll say, now, what you've got to do is you've got to become a vegetarian. Or you've got to give up this, or you've got to give up that, or you've got to sit and meditate so many hours a day, and then you'll be saved. Well, I'm here to tell you here and now that the salvation of life is in the Christ consciousness that you can have as easily as you can reach out and pick an apple, beautiful, golden, ripe apple off a tree. You can pick it and take it into your hand and you can eat it. And this is what you can do. You can take in the body of the Christ consciousness, the sacred Eucharist. You can take it into your being. You can improve. You can take the seed of God and absorb that into your consciousness. Christ can be formed in you, and it will change your character. It will change your life. If you were dishonest before, you'll be honest. If you were a creator of viciousness before, you will create beauty and love. I mean, whatever there is in your world, you may be using energy before, but now you'll use energy in greater power and you'll create in a greater measure. And your creation will be a creation of God, because Christ is formed in you. And you cannot create after the flesh anymore. In the Bible it says, henceforth know we no man after the flesh. And why is this true? It goes back to the synthetic image if you read the book. The synthetic image. We know people after the synthetic image, and what happens to the synthetic image? Well, if you know them when they're 12, they're different than when they're 20, and when they're 30. I mean, people keep changing. When we read about the Christ consciousness, it says Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. Well, is this a sameness of boredom? Of course not. It's not the sameness of boredom. It's the sameness of perfection. And is perfection uncomfortable? Why, of course it's not uncomfortable. What a ridiculous idea it would be if we would think that divine perfection, the state of God, would be uncomfortable or undesirable. It is not undesirable. It is a magnificent state which we know in part and we gather in part, but when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part is done away with, simply because it is absorbed into the wholeness of God, you see. So it's all very wonderful. And you can have it, and I can have it, and we all can have it, and that's what the Ascended Master Consciousness is all about. You know, people get hung up on the idea of wanting a world Savior. And the one thing that Jesus Christ was the most frightened about, people look at me and they say, what do you mean, Jesus was never frightened? Why, of course he wasn't frightened. But you said he was frightened. Yes, I did, but I wasn't talking about the kind of fright that you think. Jesus was only concerned, and I should have used the word concerned. What he was concerned about was that people would just look to the idea of someone to pick them up and then carry them all the way to heaven like one of these ski lifts that you get on, you know. You pay your money, you get your ticket, you get on the ski lift, you get to the top of the hill. It's very easy, you just run. You don't have to do anything, just sit on it. And that's what people are looking for. They want something they can just sit on. And then Jesus will carry them all the way up to heaven at the very summit of life. Well, it is not going to work that way, because if it did work that way, they would never really enjoy the fact that they got there. Because to every man, the burden of that man will come, and the man must lift his own burden. There's nothing wrong in that. Why, if it had been the other way, when Christ hung on the cross, I can tell you one thing, that there would never have been any more death, any more sin, any more sorrow. There wouldn't have been a single trace of wickedness that would have been left in the world when he said it is finished. You see, when he said it is finished, he referred to the fact that his own mission was finished. His mission was finished, but not yours. He said, you shall follow me in the regeneration. You shall drink the cup that I have drunk. That is the thing. The cup is the ageless Holy Grail that comes to each of our lips. Are we worthy to receive it? It is not based upon human worth. It's based upon divine idealism. the ideals of God for man. What did God envision for man? When God made you, He thought just as much about you as He did about Jesus. Because you see, in reality, there's only one beloved Son, one Christ, just one. And that Christ is He by whom all things were made. In other words, He was the perfect image, and He was the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. You see how different this is, how warped people have twisted it. The councils of Nicaea and Trent have altered the Scriptures, and the churches of the world have inherited, because of the fact that we are born late in time, and we don't get born with a knowledge of Latin and Greek. We don't suddenly spout divine theology. We have to relearn. And so our theologians relearn. And they relearn sometimes according to a dropped sight. People have dropped their sight. The philosophy of Origen of Alexandria was overthrown. It was overturned. It became heretical. The mysticism of the early church was removed. All of this went down. And in its place we have had a substitution of the divine image as being a very severe Father, and the creation of a place called H-E-double-L, which we already know about because we see it all around us. And so what happens? Men have actually stood right in front of me and looked me in the face and said, that man over there had a baby born a week ago and his baby died, and that baby is going to H-E-double-L, and that baby will burn forever and ever and ever and ever because he was not baptized. Oh, God pity us as a nation, as a world, that we do not understand the mercies of God that endure forever. How can we believe God worthy of things that we ourselves would not in our worst moments be worthy of? And yet we find it in the world. We find that we impute qualities unto one another that are not there. And horror is in the world. And why is horror in the world? Because the forces of darkness and destruction, the dark powers of the world, desire to create the illusion that darkness is greater than light, and it is not. The only thing of any worth, the only thing that's worth enduring in you is the light that's in you. And Christ said, if the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? And so we should learn to repudiate and to burn our darkness and decide instead to dwell in light, in sanity, in reason, in Christ consciousness. And what does reason mean? It means resun, R-E-S-U-N. Go ahead and get the sunlight of God through your mind. Aerate your mind and your heart. Begin to understand how you can till the soil of consciousness until the rose of Sharon is blooming within your heart, until the flowers that blossom in your mind that spring up are flowers of hope and reason, not the density of the world's horror and confusion. I heard of 2 girls with their heads cut off recently in your state, I believe near Santa Cruz, found in the mountains with headless corpses. Who perpetuates such darkness as this? Let the hound of heaven find them out, and let them receive that which they have sent forth according to divine justice. We should not live in a world where darkness and horror can dwell. We should let the heaven of consciousness within ourselves be free from those things. We should see that everyone is improved, not going down into darkness and despair. There is no strength or power in witchcraft. There is no strength in devil worship. These things are on the side of the pit, and they will be brought down to where they belong, and they will never produce the fruit of divine reason and beauty in the world. The things of Christ were from the beginning. They were the creation of God, the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And we should learn to understand what this means to our lives. We can make this duty come alive. And if we sit, for example, and say a mantra from the East Indian realms, if we sit there and say it thousands of times every day, and we say, depart, be warmed, be fed, be clothed, and we do not give, as James says, the things to our brethren that they need, what is going to happen to the world? We have a world of impracticality dwelling side by side with a practical spiritual world. We of the Great White Brotherhood are of the order of the Essenes. We understand the meaning of the Hospitallers. We understand the meaning of service, of going forth in the name of Christ to give the cup of cold water. We understand the practical aspects of feed my sheep. We must feed the sheep of Christ. We must recognize all men as His brethren. But we must understand how to divide also the fruit of that which is good from the fruit of that which is evil. That which is evil must not continue. That which is good must be multiplied, and abundantly multiplied in the world order and in ourselves. We are guardians of our own domain. We must guard ourselves. We must guard the vineyard of our heart. If we don't guard it, someone else isn't going to guard it for us. Now, I will agree that the masters will do many wonderful things for us, and this is the problem. You know, every once in a while I run into this problem, where someone comes along and they say, well, I love Jesus only, and I don't believe in any other master but Jesus. Well, a few years ago I used to say to them, if you only knew the master. Why, they're all the brothers of Jesus, and they came later in time, and some before them. Enoch was before. But the point is, all these masters have their functions, but now I don't say that anymore. I say to them, what about you? And they say, well, what do you mean about me? I'm not very good. I say, no, I know you're probably not very good. Because Jesus, you know, man came to him and said, good master. The master looked at him and said, why do you call me good? There's only one good, and that's God. And so, the God in Christ is the God in you. So you're just as good as Christ, deep, deep, deep down inside from the standpoint of the image creation. In other words, God made you in His own image. You can't get any better than that. That's a 24-karat gold stamp. You've got that, you've got the pure gold. And everybody's got it. The only problem is that people don't realize that they have it. So they don't live according to it. They live according to synthetic stamp. You got a little synthetic stamp inside of them too. And that's what we go by. So I turn back to them. I say, you don't want to believe in the masters? Or do you believe in yourself? Because someday you're going to be a master. They say, not me. They get embarrassed, you know, and they laugh a little bit, and they say, oh, no, not me. I mean, you got this wrong, brother. That's just not right, you know. Why, you know, I used to drink a little, you know, one time, and I did a few things, you know. I did a few things I shouldn't do. And I say, well, God can never wash out that stain, can He? He never can wash it out. It's too deep to dive. Let me begin to think a minute. Why, of course. That's what is meant by the cleansing of the blood. You know, the churches have it wrong. They don't understand, most of the churches don't understand what is really meant by the ability of the life of God to flow through and eradicate the things that are not God-like. It's not an impossible task at all. You know, my mother, she used to be quite a believer only in one lifetime. She didn't believe in re-embodiment. So she and I used to have some terrible arguments in friendship, you know. You always are friends with your mother, you know. So, dear sweet mother, she thought that there was never any chance when she died, that was the end of it all, and life was over, and she'd have to stand and be judged on that forever and ever and ever. There'd never be any chance on her being any better than she was when she died. Well, we never did settle the matter, and so she died. Well, she's living now in Baltimore, Maryland, and reborn the daughter of an insurance executive over there. I've never met her. I know she's there. I know the house she lives in. I know the description of the house, but I've never called on her. I don't intend to. Because I'm going to leave her completely alone, as I told her I do. I said, you're just a wonderful mother, and you've been a wonderful mother. And now she's leading a new life. And you see, the scenario goes on a little bit. And people do not realize that we've all had experiences. I remember many of my experiences. And I'm sure many of you do too. But the interesting thing is, you don't get these pieces of knowledge as a rule until you've reached a certain development in your life. It would be kind of terrible, wouldn't it, if, like that little girl in India, you know, she was born, and then she remembered her 5 sons that lived in another town, and she remembered her husband, and she remembered the house she lived in. For some reason, some fluke of the cosmos, she came into life with a memory of all that. Well, that was a pretty hard thing on her. You can understand that. Some of you who are mothers and fathers have children. Well, if you died and you remembered your family and you were living in another place and you knew where to get to, but you didn't have the bus fare and weren't able to get there, you couldn't convince your family of that, well, that'd be quite a problem now, wouldn't it, you know? And you wouldn't be really comfortable in some cases that whatever we are is not that which we shall be. Because what we are doing now is we are in the state of becoming. We're becoming more than what we are. And every day sees the dawn of new opportunity for creation. We must catch this vision. Otherwise, stultification sets in and then comes rigor mortis. And I don't like that guy. You like rigor mortis? His first name is Rigor, you know, and the last name is Mortis. I mean, he sets in and then we get stiff, you know. But we're already stiff. That's why we get stiff. You see what I mean? I mean, we're stiff in our lives. We don't relax. We don't allow the light to flow through. We don't allow ourselves to be part of the universe. We don't allow ourselves to generate and regenerate. See, we generate, but we don't regenerate. That's the trouble with people. They just generate. Sit there and generate. What are they generating? It's a funny brew sometimes, isn't it? What's going on in the world? So the whole basic concept is the Christ concept of ongoingness and the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes in consciousness. Be able to generate and regenerate. Be able to expand your consciousness until you can accept the fact that you're going someplace. Stop this business of feeling that you're Joe Blow sitting there in a little house somewhere and you have a deed to that house and you have a 1972 car or something like that and decide your bank account is you. You're not identifying with any of this. Forget it. Get rid of it all. I don't mean to give it away. You don't have to give it to me. You can do whatever you want to with it. But I mean, it doesn't mean that much. You can do whatever you want to with what you have. If you don't have it, you can get something. You can get abundance of all kinds. You can get material things. But why be satisfied with material things? Let's get spiritual things. We are spirits, you know. The spirits of just men made perfect. We've got to have the sense of divine justice in ourselves. The biggest problem in the world today, as I see it, is people who think that God is unjust. God is not unjust. We're unjust. People are unjust. And there's so much injustice in the world. But we can't correct it all. Can we now, really? Can we correct it all? The best way to correct it is to go right straight to the Father and become one with Him. You know, Abraham, all he did, he says he became a friend of God. If we'd only develop friendship with God and not try to develop friendship with the world, we would have all of the answers. And so the ascended master consciousness is grand and glorious and beautiful and blessed. And we are most fortunate to be able to have contact with the Master. Yes, I'm not going to hang my shingle out here and say, this is the place where only God is. It's true. Only God is here, but He manifests as Christ and as other ascended masters too. And as you and I. In other words, we all have a place in the sun. Now, this is a little different than some people think of. They think as though, holy, holy, holy Lord God Almighty, only Thou art holy. And they see the seraphim fanning Him. And they have all angels up there fanning God with big fans. They have a vision of God as a great Pharaoh. When in reality, the Lord of love, as Henry Van Dyke said, the Lord of love from above comes down with the men who work. He dwells with the men who work. Yet that's the concept we have to understand, is that God is practical and that He sent His Son for that reason. And who is the Son? The only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth, the Lamb of God slain from the foundation of the world. This means quite a while before Jesus appeared, doesn't it? Slain from the foundation of the world. He knew that. Well, you start to know that. You start to know that you were really a creation of God in the beginning, and start to get yourselves back on the firing line of truth, and watch how all of those atoms inside of you start exploding. You know, you wonder what's going on inside of you. You find regeneration is working. And when regeneration works, the first thing you do, you're going to find yourself right into the brotherhood. You're going to get caught up with the brotherhood. Caught up into the air to meet the Lord in the air. Yes, right here and now. It will happen right while you're on earth. That doesn't mean you're not going to get caught up in some way afterward in consciousness, but you're going to get caught up, and you're going to see the light. And you'll have the genuine St. Paul experience. You'll have the Christ experience. You'll get out of the prison that Peter was in, you know, that where the prison doors went wide open, you know, the jailer came running. You're going to get out of all the jails of human creation. You're going to be free at last, and you'll say, thank God that I was able to understand the everlasting day. I'm going to say it again. Thank God that I was able to understand the everlasting day. You know, the sun stood still. And in reality, the Son of God and the timelessness of the Christ will stand still for you wherever you are. And you will be caught up into the caravan of those that are in the vanguard of moving forward in this age. We must produce the kingdom of God upon this earth, that it can be done. It is not a great fanfare. It was a little tiny thing that happened over in Bethlehem. I mean, when Christ was born, just a few people came, you know, a few angels and shepherds and whatnot. They came, and the drama was very small. And then suddenly Christendom dawned. But it has not produced yet what it is intended to produce. And it is up to us today to honor God by making it produce what God intended it to produce. And where better can you start than in your own life? Thank you, and God bless you.